Hello. Good morning, everybody. Debbie, thank you for that. Mary, before we open our discussion, could you just tell us a little more about some of your amazing accomplishments that Debbie spoke of?
Yes, thank you. This thing is on and live. Well, first of all, good morning. Oh my goodness, let's try that again. I say good morning. We are out. I am doing my first speech not in sweatpants right now. And it feels really good. I even put on my heels for you all. I'm dressed and ready. And I would just say this is so special. And I really want to thank Debbie, Asher, the entire EMA family, because it has been a year and a half of a lack of connection, a lack of collaboration, a lack of collective action in a moment when we most needed it. And I want to talk a little bit more about this moment, but this is a moment that requires all of that. And we know that this is a tough moment on a lot of levels. We got an IPCC report that essentially is being hailed as the code red for humanity right now. We're in code red. This means the climate crisis is getting worse quicker than we imagined. But you don't have to tell us that in California. We are living it in California with record heat, record wildfires, record droughts, all of the challenges that we are facing right now. We know how critical this moment is. We know what we are facing. But there is good news. There is really good news. And the good news is we have the solutions. We know how to solve the climate crisis. We know what it's going to take. It is going to take a complete transformation of our economy. It is going to take electrifying our buildings, our transportation, greening our communities and our landscapes to make them more resilient, transitioning our workforce to family-sustaining jobs in the green economy. In addition, we have to get the pollution and the toxics out of our water, our air, our products, everything we are using. But we have the solutions for those. That's not the problem. And there's more good news. The more good news is that we have the single best opportunity we have ever had to advance justice at scale. The changes we have to make, the investments we are going to have to make into our economy and into our infrastructure gives us the largest single opportunity we have ever had to correct the injustices of the past and make sure we are building a more climate just future, that we are getting it right in the future. So not only do we have good news, we have an immense opportunity. That's exciting. That's inspiring. So what's the holdup? The holdup is, the real problem is that we do not have the power to do it at the rate and scale that science tells us we have to. We have till 2030. Science is very clear what it's going to take to solve this climate crisis. Very clear. And we are not doing it quick enough. We are not doing it broadly enough. We are not doing it at the scale that's required. And this is what CLCV, the California League of Conservation Voters, is laser focused on. This is what we do. We look to build the power to solve the climate crisis, advance justice, and create a global roadmap for action. That's the game. And we do that. We focus on that because we believe in our core that we can change what's possible. We believe in our core that there are 3 things it will take to build the power to make this possible. The first is government action. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later too. The second is market leadership. And the third is social pressure. That's what it's going to take. Government action, and I want to be crystal clear about this, there is absolutely no way we solve this climate crisis without broad-scale, significant, deep government action. It's not going to happen. Government has immense tools, from regulation to incentives to subsidies to scale these solutions we know we have, to accelerate the solutions. That's government's job in a crisis. We need leadership in office that has a vision, that will prioritize it, and be bold in creating a climate just future. And we know it works. Tesla, the solar industry, We have success stories from 2009 when those investments and those changes were made. Those things would not be, those companies, those industries would not be flourishing if we didn't have government action back in 2009. We know what it will take. That's what we're working on. We're working on finding and electing the boldest possible climate champions across the state, federally, state, locally. We are working on holding them accountable through organizing voters to pass the boldest possible policies, because we know you are not going to get bold policies unless you have bold policymakers in office. Now I want to talk about market leadership. So many of you in this room are doing market leadership. In order to scale and accelerate these solutions, we need innovation in the marketplace. We need strategies in the marketplace. We need our corporations to be creating a race to the top on climate change, creating that peer pressure, being a powerful voice in government for the change that's needed, being a powerful voice of economic leaders saying, acting on climate is economic solutions. Acting on climate will grow our economy. That is an essential voice in the discussion. I want to talk about social pressure. And social pressure is the most important of all three of these because it drives both. Social pressure drives government action. Social pressure, individual action and leadership, is in the political system is called democracy. That's what democracy is. Voting, advocating, organizing your communities, all of that is the social pressure and literally the only thing that will drive significant government action. Social pressure in the marketplace is about consumers demanding with their pocketbooks transparency and sustainability. That drives the market leadership we need to see. There is no way we will get to solving this climate crisis without the invaluable social pressure and leadership of individuals. And so many of us here today are using our unique platforms, voice, assets to drive the conversation forward. And that's what we're looking for. Everybody has their own authentic way to lead on this issue based on what their talents are, where they stand, what they're doing. That's the movement we are building at the California League of Conservation Voters. We want to elevate and celebrate the companies, the individuals, and the solutions that are radically moving this conversation forward. And it doesn't cost anything to join. Go to ecovote.org. You can sign up, stay plugged in to what's happening in Sacramento and DC. Stay plugged in to easy to take actions to make a difference that you can share with family and friends. That's what we would love to invite you to do with us today. Now, before I close, I want to I feel like I have been saying these things for a long time. You all have been saying these things for a long time. This has been a fight that I would love to say we've made a lot more progress on at this point, but we haven't, unfortunately. And it's discouraging. This is tough work. I lead an organization focused on climate change and politics. You don't think I get discouraged every freaking day? It is tough out there. And I know so many of us for years, for decades, have been in this fight. And it is hard. And we know because we've done tons of polling and focus groups that voters feel apathy and discouragement and fear because they don't believe, they don't know that we have solutions on these things. We actually have the solutions. They believe the solutions don't exist and that the problem is too big to solve. But we know there are solutions. And that's why it's incumbent upon us to stay rooted in our values, our clarity of mission, and in believing that we truly can change what's possible. We have to stay rooted and grounded in that hope, that optimism, and that vision for actually a better future for each of us. And guess what it takes to stay grounded in that? It means we have to stay really close to why we each personally do this work. That's what it takes to stay grounded. And I would say this, this last week, I didn't think I was gonna be emotional. I'm getting a little emotional. This last week, I had 2 of my nephews under the age of 2 staying with me for the whole week, and it was a bundle of fun and also reaffirmed my life choices to not have children. But they were adorable and amazing. And every morning I would get them out of bed and, get them ready and laugh with them and giggle the happiest in the morning and look into their eyes and make them smile. And it was a constant reminder for me of why I do this work. And it was a quick fix of inspiration to be as fierce as possible on all of our behalves in the work that we do at CLCV. Because I do this work so that my loved ones and the little ones in my life can grow up to a future free of fear, displacement, and disaster. That is why I am in this work. Every day, I try to remind myself, this is about creating a future for my loved ones that is free of fear, displacement, and disaster. So I want to thank you all, because I know we each have our why on why we do this work and why we show up every day and continue to manufacture that hope and optimism that is essential. So thank you for showing up, for leading, for using your power to move this conversation forward. Thank you.
Mary, seriously, you got me tearing up, and it's like 9:30. That was so beautiful and passionate and hopeful, and thank you for everything that you do, truly. So just to put it out there, I'm a voter, and I'm very honored that 3 years ago, I got my U.S. citizenship, and I was able to vote in our last presidential election, which never felt more important. So it really, truly is my great honor to begin our EMA Impact Summit with rock stars in the legislative world. Joining Mary is Congressmember Harley Rouda. Oh, magically. Hello. Hi, Harley.
How are you?
Great. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks for joining. So let's just dive right in. My first question goes to Congressmember Rouda. We know that you helped craft climate legislation early on in your tenure in Congress. Tell us a little about the climate policy opportunities in Washington, D.C. right now, and what are the policy solutions being debated?
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be with you today on what is actually the most important topic facing all of us across the globe. I had the privilege of chairing the subcommittee for oversight, the environmental subcommittee, and our number one focus was on addressing climate change. And we laid out a multitude of hearings in 3 phases: past, present, and future. Past, what did we know? When did we know it? Why didn't we do anything about it? And that was eye-opening, seeing what the fossil fuel companies, and specifically Exxon and Shell Company, knew back in the 80s and still hoodwinked all of us as they continued to seek subsidies to focus on fossil fuels. In the present stage, we focused on the impact of climate change as we are here right now. And this was really important phase, because one of the biggest pushbacks I get from the other side of the aisle is that we can't afford to address climate change. And what we're seeing literally firsthand today and in the previous week, not to mention in the previous years, is the incredible economic and human hardship that's taking place because of severe weather events caused by climate change. And as we also see repeatedly on TV, that people of color, people of lower socioeconomic capabilities are the most struck by these challenges due to climate change. So we really laid out very specifically the true economic cost. And then we looked at the future. What do we do if we do nothing, the apocalyptic road, or if we take the road to ideally nirvana? And we laid out all of the tools that we have to take advantage of to make the change. At the end of this, we issued a report. It was the findings and recommendations to the Biden administration and the 117th Congress. And I'll make sure that we get a copy circulated to the organization so that you can circulate it with your members. But what we're seeing right now with the Biden administration, thank goodness, and this would not be happening with a Trump administration, we're seeing with the Biden administration, the whole of government addressing these issues. And Mary, you hit the nail on the head. This is a unique opportunity because government can play the biggest role in addressing climate change. And to see the Biden administration through the bipartisan infrastructure package have major components to address climate change is historic and needed, but doesn't go far enough. And that's why the subsequent legislation that will be passed, hopefully through reconciliation, continues that process of modernizing our electrical grid, having a greater focus on the electrification of automobiles, a greater use of infrastructure to bring down the impact of climate change. And I'll say one other thing, and I'll turn it back to you. The one thing we learned from the process we went through in the 116th Congress, when you look at all the levers that can be pulled to address climate change, the reality is we need to pull them all. And if we do that, and we do that in a timely manner, like right now, we're still going to see continued degradation in our climate because of what we've already done. But the good news is, as has been pointed out by the previous speakers, is that while we're going to continue to trend up towards continuing rising temperatures, if we take those actions now, we can start bringing it back down. And if we do that, we will truly save our world from the demise that we are tracking on because of our unwillingness to take on climate change.
Right, right. Thank you for that, Congressman. And Mary, why is it so important that we pass federal climate policy this year? I mean, what's at stake? We've got a little bit, but just to elaborate on that.
Yes. And I have to just say, I love being in this space with two phenomenal leaders who are using their power, their reach. I mean, if you don't know Congressmember Harley Rouda, you need to. He was like the stealth ninja in Congress to get really critical things passed, even pushing for things around air quality that we hadn't even done in the state of California yet. So get to know, look him up, really a star. And then Emmanuelle, I have to say, when talent use their platform, this is not an easy thing to wade into. This is my day job. I do this every day. I live and breathe this stuff. But using your platform and being courageous on stuff like this is phenomenal and inspiring. Thank you so much for doing this with us.
God,
it's
thank you.
impressive. Why we have to do it this year? So here's the thing. This is a little wonky politically, but next year is midterms. 2022 is a year where people are going to be running for office again. It is hard to get tough votes passed in a year where people are running for office. 2, redistricting. Who's heard of redistricting? Okay, not enough people have heard of redistricting. So redistricting is happening right now. We have a program called Green Map. These are lines, state, local, and federal lines that are being drawn for districts. People have heard of gerrymandering? This is how this happens. California is lucky and somewhat unique that we have an independent commission that is drawing our lines. Those lines are going to be drawn and released by mid-January. And that means all of our districts are shifting significantly. And this is that next step from the census. And we already know this is deeply going to impact environmental champions in DC. We already know this is going to impact our majorities in Congress and in the House of Representatives. So we don't know exactly how much, but we know that those majorities are razor thin right now and necessary to pass big things. And so when we look at midterms, when we look at redistricting, these votes are hard enough, they're only going to get harder. In addition, we have kicked the can down the road so long. There is no more road left to kick the can down. It's it. It's now or never. We've got to do these things. So our moment right now and the conversation in Washington is that they're looking to do votes before the end of September. It's September 2nd. We have a couple of weeks here to make sure these two packages, a bill on infrastructure and a Build Back Better bill that would spend a ton of money on climate, get through and happen before the end of the year.
Amazing. And you'll remind us at the end of this, the website that we can all log on to before the end and get really active. Congressmember Rouda, how does racial justice and equity fit into the current federal climate packages? And why is it so important in the current discussion?
I touched on this on my earlier comments. We're seeing it right now in what's happening throughout Louisiana and now in the Northeast from the storms, it disproportionately impacts lower socioeconomic levels. And we have a history of putting the factories and plants that emit the emissions that cause climate change in low-income neighborhoods, and then simultaneously not providing the appropriate health care for them. That has to stop, and that's why I'm so excited about this legislation. Frankly, let's be honest, the bipartisan legislation doesn't take the number of steps that need to be taken to address this consistent discrimination of those individuals. But the second piece of legislation goes much further, and that is important because we have to right the wrongs of the past. And it's not just righting the wrongs, it's actually making all of the United States, all of our citizens, all of our neighbors more safe and more secure. And so when we have these discussions about this legislation, we have to make sure that we take into consideration these past wrongs. And one more thing I'd like to add on this. This is not just the federal government. This is the state government, local government, and businesses, as well as individuals. We all play a role in making this happen. And yeah, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have local government engaged in this. The one thing we do know is that mayors and city councils can move a heck of a lot faster and effectively in a short period of time than the federal government. Mm-hmm. So as we fight, all of us on this call and in person, let's make sure that we recognize there's different areas of government as well as business that can help us in our collective fight.
Yes, absolutely. And amen to everything that you said. Mary, what are your thoughts? Anything additional?
Yeah. So, we are in this collective kind of, not for people who've been bearing the burden, but for our political systems and our mass systems of understanding the extent and the depth of racism within our systems. And the truth is, we know that unless we are building policies and solutions that are explicitly anti-racist, they are going to be perpetuating racism. That's the truth. And so we need our policies to be explicitly anti-racist in general, but also because environmental impacts, climate impacts, just as the Congressmember said, are disproportionately in huge rates affecting communities of color and have for generations. And so unless both we have to make sure we are addressing those disparities and that work, but we also have to make sure we are building something that is correcting and actually anti-racist in itself. When we say build back better, that means justice too. That means racial, economic, and social justice. And here's what's so excited about the over $3 trillion, that's a T, dollar package in DC right now. It has the first ever truly explicitly racial justice provisions within it. Some really exciting stuff. In addition, following California's model, as they always do, the federal government has issued Justice 40. How many folks know what Justice 40 is? Nobody. Okay, on my team. Hey, shout out to CLCB staff. I like it. So Justice 40 is a mandate that 40% of these investments have to benefit communities of color, disadvantaged communities, underserved communities. Okay, clap for that.
Yes.
That's a big deal. That is huge. And that is just the first step in what we need to be doing to ensure that investments are going to the folks hurt first and worst and who've been bearing the burden of our pollution-based economy. And again, that is Black, Indigenous, API, other communities of color. So that's exciting. And we have to make sure that passes, and we have to make sure it's implemented powerfully. That's why this is so important in this conversation. We can't lose that piece. And that is unique to the kind of $3 trillion package.
Excellent. Thank you. Congressmember, what are some of the challenges and obstacles in DC to pass climate policy? And what's the inside scoop on how the negotiations are going?
The big challenge is frankly, getting both sides of the aisle to understand how important it is for us to address this. In our committee hearings, I can't tell you how many times that there were individuals that cared more about making talking points, taking shots at the Green New Deal, taking shots at specific members of the panel, talking about cow's flatulence and that we're not going to be able to eat steaks anymore if the Democrats have their way. I mean, just a bunch of nonsense and not really addressing the issue. And the challenge is that that carries on into their districts and was supported by Trump. The good news is with Trump being gone, we're finally starting to have the opportunity to have more relevant conversations. Coupled with that, when you see, again, what's happening with these extreme weather events, they don't just hit Democratic areas, they hit everywhere. Right. And we're seeing it happen. We're seeing some of the worst drought conditions repeatedly in red districts, farms, agricultural areas that are being severely impacted with rising prices across a host of commodities. These are the types of things that, it's sad to say, are finally getting others on the other side of the aisle to recognize, yeah, this is something we need to deal with. But we also still have to overcome the second piece of this, and that is, many people on the other side feel that anything we do is a waste of time because China and others aren't following suit. And I call that the toddler argument. Why should I have to do it if they're not doing it? But the reality is it's also a false argument. When you look at which countries are the greatest polluters, yes, China is the greatest polluter of all the countries on the globe. But when you look at CO2 emissions on a per capita basis, the United States is number one. In fact, and don't hold me to this, but I'm fairly sure that China is number 7 and India doesn't even make the top 10. Wow. So we have to recognize that we have the opportunity as a country to not just wait for others to join us, but to actually lead, which we have always been so good at, and also build the technologies and industries of tomorrow and export that across the world to make sure that we can address climate change. So bringing our Republican friends along faster has to be part of the equation here. Now, that being said, I also believe that we have an absolute moral obligation to take this on now. And if they won't come along with us, then let's march without them. And I wish that Senators Manchin and Sinema would allow a change in the process so that we can pass legislation on a simple majority. We need to make those changes. We need to get back to, if you want to prevent legislation, get up and speak till you can't speak anymore, but not filibuster through simple votes of 60 people plus. That's not the way to run the government. So we have to change that if we're going to have effective legislation to address these issues. Right. The inside skinny on what's going on right now with the two bills. Look, I think we're all very, very confident we're going to have a bipartisan infrastructure bill passed. That's in a sense the easy one. I'm also very confident that we will get the supplemental one through reconciliation. It's not going to be easy because there's going to be a lot of tugging and pulling, especially on the, for lack of a better term, the more controversial parts of it, even within the Democratic Party, and the size of it. I think there's going to be some pushback on just the sheer size of $3.5 trillion over an extended period of time. But what we have to do, all of us have to do, is make sure that whatever package is finally agreed on, that we sell it. We sell it as to the how it addresses climate change, how it provides economic prosperity, and how it provides a future that we want to see for not just us and our kids, but grandchildren and future generations. Right.
Absolutely. God, just praying for some unity, that we could all get on the same page. And Mary, I am particularly very interested and curious about this, is how can California help overcome these challenges, and what can we do? You mentioned it a little bit, but hopefully you can close out this with some real inspirational actions.
Yes. And just to reiterate what the Congressmember just said, we are on the brink of doing something huge in DC, on the brink, and yet it is all so fragile. I was working in D.C. not in D.C., but doing work in D.C. I couldn't quite get myself to move there. California is too great. During 2009, when Obama was first elected, and we thought we were going to cap and trade, we thought we were going to get big climate policy, worked so hard, and it all fell apart. And that was a moment in which, very similar, We had kind of folks who prioritize the environment in the Senate, in the House of Representatives, and in the White House. So this is close, and it's going to be very, very close. California has a huge role to play, not just because we are one of the states that are on the front lines of climate impacts. We are living this reality. And that means that we have to be really close to the solutions and the conversation about what needs to happen, because we are the ones who are experiencing this right now, and we know we need to be involved in the conversations and the solutions. On just a purely political and power side of things, California is the home of so many influential, important decision makers in DC. When you think about our Vice President Harris, when you think about Speaker Pelosi, when you think about Kevin McCarthy, when you think about the critical members who sit on these important committees that are going to be stewarding this effort, when you think about the role that our members who are leading the champions on the environment come from California, and they organize their colleagues to action. That's the role that California plays. We also export our policies. Half of the things Biden has already announced this year came from California first. We were the first. And so we play that important role. In addition, this is a state that houses the most innovation, the most talent, the most creativity, arts, all of that in the entire nation. And innovation, corporate innovation, talent, art, culture, that plays a significant role in creating the social pressure and the movement that big things can happen in DC. And so we have leaders in those sectors that are essential to making this happen. And we have the voices on the ground that can really articulate what needs to happen. So what we need is everybody to be active. We need everybody to be contacting their legislators, their congresspeople, their senators, and saying, we need both packages. We need infrastructure, and we need this bigger $3.5 trillion plan that is critical equity and climate investments. We need both. Nothing less will be enough for our future. And those are the calls to actions we have on our website. You can go to ecovote.org, find us there. Lots of actions come out weekly. And those are easy places to make sure your voice is heard. A lot of resources online in addition. And I'll give you just a sneak peek because I'm realizing we are doing a name change on September 20th. So don't get confused. We will become California Environmental Voters, Enviro Voters for short. So you don't want the brand confusion to trip anybody else up. But we will be making that shift on September 20th. But you can find us at the same place. So take action. Make your voice heard. That is the biggest thing you can do. Organize your networks on social, whatever platform it is you have. We all have our own networks. Whatever that looks like for you, get creative about how you use that to apply some social pressure right now.
Excellent. And I'll be going to EcoVote. Yes.
If I could add one thing, because
Please.
Mary touched on this a tad, and we haven't really talked about it enough. You know, the fires here in California, we do all these things to address climate change, yet we allow these fires to get out of control, not just here in California, but throughout the United States, but predominantly the Western states. We have to make a commitment at the federal and state levels, but primarily the federal level, because the states can't do it, to make sure that our firefighters have the resources and personnel and assets to address these fires better than we are doing. Otherwise, many of these other great things we are doing are immediately lost in the aftermath of these fires.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you both so much. That was so wonderful. Congressman Rouda, thank you for joining us. And
Thank
Mary, you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Keep on keeping on. Yeah. And we're going to join you. All right. So, voila. Thank you.